Some men fight their battles in the streets, others fight them in the system, and sometimes they have to do both. Jamal Carter had spent his whole life walking a thin line between success and struggle, between justice and survival. He wasn't just another black man in America. He was a war veteran, a business owner, a man who had played by the rules his whole life. And yet, none of that mattered when the red and blue lights flashed behind him. Step out of the car. It was just a parking ticket. Just a ticket. But the moment he reached for his wallet, the officer's hands went to their guns. A familiar fear gripped his chest. He had seen this before, too many times. Then, one of them smirked. Resisting, huh? We'll see about that. Cold metal snapped around his wrists. Jamal could have fought. He could have shouted. But instead, he did something that changed everything. He made one phone call. And when the voice on the other end picked up, the officers' smug faces faded. "Put me on speaker," said the deep, commanding voice. Jamal smirked. Game over.
If you care about people in trouble, hit subscribe. A special story is waiting for you.
The cuffs dug into Jamal's wrists as he stood against the squad car, his breath steady but his mind racing. The parking lot was nearly empty, the neon glow of a liquor store sign flickering in the background. 3 officers, all white, all enjoying this. "You think you can just ignore tickets in my city?" One of them, Officer Reynolds, sneered. "It's not your city," Jamal said coolly. "It's mine too." The second officer, Davis, tightened his grip on Jamal's arm. "Watch your mouth." Jamal sighed. He had seen this before. A routine stop that wasn't routine at all. A ticket that had turned into an arrest. The system working exactly the way it was designed to. "You got a record, Carter?" Reynolds asked. "You look like the type." Jamal let out a slow breath. "Stay calm. You can check, but you won't find one." The officers chuckled. "Maybe tonight's your lucky night then." That's when he pulled out the ace. "My phone's in my pocket," Jamal said. "Let me make one call." Reynolds laughed. "Who, your lawyer? Your mama?" "No," Jamal said, locking eyes with him. "My best friend." Davis scoffed. "And who's that?" Jamal smiled for the first time. "The chief of police." Reynolds' face fell. "Bullshit." "Check my phone," Jamal said. "Go ahead, unless you're scared." A tense silence. Then, grudgingly, Davis yanked the phone from Jamal's pocket, scrolling through the contacts. The moment he saw the name, his expression shifted. Jamal could see it, the hesitation, the sudden uncertainty. "Call him," Jamal said. Davis hesitated. Then, finally, he hit dial. A single ring. Then a deep, commanding voice answered. "This is Chief Daniels. Who the hell is using Jamal's phone?" The color drained from their faces. Jamal smirked. Game over. The air in the parking lot changed the moment the phone call connected. "This is Chief Daniels. Who the hell is using Jamal's phone?" Silence. The officers froze. Jamal could see it. The sudden tension in their shoulders, the uncertainty in their eyes. The game had changed. Officer Reynolds cleared his throat and put the phone on speaker. Chief, we have a situation here." "A situation." Daniel's voice was sharp. "Unless that situation involves saving his damn life, you better be careful with what you say next." Jamal smirked, his wrists still cuffed behind his back. He had known Daniel since childhood, back when they were just kids trying to survive in the same rough neighborhood. Now, one was a millionaire businessman, the other the most powerful cop in the city. Reynolds hesitated. "Sir, Carter had an outstanding ticket. He was resisting." "Resisting?" Daniel's voice dropped lower, dangerous now. "So, let me get this straight. You arrested my oldest friend over a parking ticket, and now you're lying about him resisting?" Jamal could almost hear the vein popping in Daniel's forehead. Officer Davis shifted uncomfortably. We, uh, we were just doing our job, sir. You call this doing your job? Daniel snapped. You're supposed to serve and protect, not harass and humiliate. Jamal locked eyes with Reynolds. The man's confidence was crumbling, but his pride wouldn't let him back down so easily. We didn't know he was your friend, Chief, Reynolds muttered. So if he wasn't my friend, then what? Would he still be in cuffs? No answer. The truth was clear, hanging thick in the air. If Jamal hadn't made that call, this night could have ended very differently. Take those damn cuffs off him now! Daniel's voice was ice. Reynolds hesitated. His pride was wounded. He glanced at Davis and the third officer, waiting for backup, but none came. Finally, with clenched teeth, he pulled out the key and unlocked the cuffs. Jamal rolled his wrists, the steel biting his skin finally gone. He took a slow step forward, staring Reynolds down. How many others? Jamal asked quietly. Reynolds frowned. What? How many other black men have you done this to? Jamal's voice was even, but the anger underneath was boiling. How many didn't have a chief of police on speed dial? Reynolds said nothing. Jamal, I'm on my way. Daniel's voice crackled through the phone. Stay put. We're going to have a long conversation. Jamal smiled slightly, but there was no joy in it. Tonight, he had won. But he couldn't shake the thought. How many others had lost? And what was he going to do about it? Jamal stood in the parking lot, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had been. The cold metal was gone, but the feeling lingered. He had walked away tonight. But what about the men who never got that chance? A few minutes later, headlights cut through the darkness as a black SUV pulled up. The driver's door swung open, and Chief Daniels stepped out. Daniels wasn't in uniform. He didn't need to be. His presence alone carried enough weight to make the three officers stiffen like soldiers awaiting judgment. He walked straight to Jamal first. You good? Jamal nodded. I'm standing. Daniels exhaled sharply, then turned to the officers. His face was stone, his anger controlled. But his voice? Pure fire. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't have your badges tonight. Reynolds' face twitched, but he held his ground. We were just following protocol, sir. Daniels let out a short, bitter laugh. Protocol? A parking ticket turned into an arrest? You pulled him out of his car, cuffed him, and called it resisting. That sound like protocol to you? Davis shifted uneasily. We didn't know who he was. Daniel's jaw clenched. Oh, I heard you the first time, and that's the damn problem. The air was thick with tension. The parking lot, once filled with confidence and control from the officers, now felt like the aftermath of a battle. Daniels looked around. His voice lowered, but somehow it became even more dangerous. You ever stop to think about how many times you've done this to a man who wasn't my best friend? Someone who didn't have the right number to call? He shook his head. Nah, you didn't. Because this isn't about crime. It's about power, about who you think deserves respect and who doesn't. Reynolds' jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Jamal stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. You see a black man in a nice car and assume he's a threat. You see me dressed like this and assume I don't belong. He looked Reynolds dead in the eye. What were you planning to do, huh? Lock me up? Throw me in the system? Would I have made it home if I didn't have Daniels on speed dial? Reynolds swallowed. He had no answer. Daniels turned to Jamal. You want to press charges? Jamal considered it. He had the power now. He could bury these men, drag them through the mud like they tried to do to him. But that wouldn't fix the real problem. This isn't just about me, he said quietly. It's about all the people they've done this to before. His jaw tightened. I want something bigger. Daniel studied him for a moment, then nodded. I thought you might. He turned back to the officers. Go home. You'll be hearing from me tomorrow. Reynolds opened his mouth as if to argue, but something in Daniel's eyes made him stop. He gave Jamal one last look, then turned and walked to the squad car. Davis and the other officer followed. Jamal watched them drive away. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. You should have called me before they put the cuffs on. Jamal let out a dry laugh. And missed the opportunity to scare the hell out of them? Not a chance. Daniel shook his head with a smirk, but his eyes were tired. This doesn't end here. You know that, right? Jamal nodded. He had spent his whole life playing by the rules, thinking if he worked hard enough, he could outrun the weight of history. Tonight was proof that wasn't true, and he was done staying quiet. He met Daniel's gaze. Then let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Daniels exhaled, then smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Because this wasn't just about one parking ticket, one bad night, one close call. This was about a system that needed to be broken so it could finally be rebuilt. The next morning, Jamal sat in Daniel's office, staring at the file on the desk between them. It was thick. Too thick. These are all complaints? Jamal asked, flipping through the pages. Daniels nodded grimly. Against Reynolds, Davis, and their buddies. Excessive force, racial profiling, unlawful searches, you name it. He exhaled sharply. And guess how many of these cases led to disciplinary action? Jamal already knew the answer. None. Daniels nodded. Not a damn one. Jamal clenched his jaw. His own case wasn't unique. It was just one more story in a long, bloody history. But now, he had something most of those men never got. Proof. Power. And a chance to fight back. What are we waiting for? Jamal said. Let's take them down. Daniels hesitated. It's not that simple. These guys aren't just a few bad cops. They're protected. By the unions, by people in high places. Jamal leaned forward. You're the chief of police. You have power. Daniels gave him a long look. And you have money. The room fell silent. Jamal realized what he was saying. This wasn't just about justice. It was about war, and wars needed funding. Daniels folded his hands. The system fights back, Jamal. Even when you have the truth on your side. You know what happens to cops who go after their own? To black men who push too hard? Jamal did. The news was filled with names, activists, journalists, officers who tried to break the system and got buried instead. Daniels leaned in. I need to know. Are you really ready for this? Jamal stared at the files. He could walk away. Go back to his life, his businesses, his money. Forget this ever happened. But he saw Mira's face, his little sister, his nephews, the next generation. He couldn't walk away. Let's do it, Jamal said. Daniels nodded. Then we move fast. He slid another file across the desk. Jamal opened it and felt his blood go cold. Inside were photos. Pictures of Jamal. His house, his office, his family. Someone was already watching him. A single note was tucked inside. Drop it, or we'll make you disappear. Jamal exhaled. His fingers tightened around the page. He looked at Daniels. Too late, he said. I'm all in. Jamal sat in his car outside his sister's house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The threat was clear. Back off or lose everything. His family was in danger. Daniels had told him to be smart. We take them down the right way. We build a case. We expose them. But Jamal knew how this worked. Corrupt men don't go down without a fight. And sometimes, the law wasn't enough. The next day, Daniels called. It's worse than we thought. Jamal met him in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, the place they used to run to as kids when the world got too heavy. Daniels threw down a folder. Internal Affairs isn't gonna touch this. City Hall is stalling. And the department? Half of them are covering for Reynolds and his crew. He rubbed his face. They want this buried. Jamal opened the folder. More reports, more stories just like his. Innocent men locked up, families destroyed. He exhaled. So, what do we do? Daniels hesitated. Then his jaw tightened. We make them scared. Jamal raised an eyebrow. You serious? Daniels looked at him. They sent you a threat, didn't they? That means they're scared of you already. Let's give them a reason to be. Jamal's pulse pounded. He had played by the rules his whole life, believed in the system. But maybe it was time to break it. That night, Jamal made a call. Not to a lawyer, not to the press, to the streets. Within hours, the city knew. The businesses Jamal funded, the activists who had been fighting this war for years, the people tired of being treated like criminals in their own neighborhoods. They all showed up. Outside the precinct, outside City Hall, thousands, chanting, filming, exposing everything. And then, Daniels made his move. While the world watched, he walked straight into his own department and slapped Reynolds' arrest warrant on the captain's desk. For civil rights violations, excessive force, falsifying reports, pick your poison, Daniels said. But he's done. The captain hesitated. This could bring the whole department down. Daniels stared him down. Then maybe it should. By morning, the news had exploded. Reynolds and Davis, suspended, under investigation. The case going federal, more officers exposed. The system cracking at the seams. Jamal watched from his office, exhausted, bruised, but victorious. Daniels called. We did it. Jamal exhaled. Not yet. Because he knew. This was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over, but now the whole world was watching. And they would never be silent again.
The end. Or just the beginning. If you care about justice, hit subscribe. More stories are waiting.